Hello, everyone. This is Henny Espinosa with Justice Foundation. Today, we are joined by Paul Walker, co-founder of Wild Tracks Belize, a well-established conservation organization working to protect and conserve endangered species and biodiversity. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
So, Paul, you started Wild Tracks back in was it 1990 with your wife? At Sarte. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Sartehena, right? In the coastal district of Belize. So, tell us a little bit about your background and why you ended up in Belize and what prodded you to start Wild Tracks.
Right. We'll make it concise because it's quite a long story. My wife Zoe and I are both wildlife biologists. We'd been doing research in a number of tropical countries, Southeast Asia, Costa Rica, Ecuador and Peru. And then we were offered the job of coming out to Belize to establish Belize's first privately protected area. So we came out and spent 2 years founding that reserve and really fell in love with the country of Belize, decided to try and stay on. And really, we looked at what some of the conservation gaps were in our local area around the village of Sartehena. And environmental education was one of the big ones. And so Wild Tracks actually started as an environmental education organization, taking children out into the different habitats, the tropical forests, out to the reef, along the mangrove coastlines and the savannas, teaching about the ecosystems on the ground rather than from textbooks. And it was actually that which has led to the practical on-the-ground conservation work that we do. One thing builds on another.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So right now, Wild Tracks is the only facility in Belize to provide rehabilitation, care for primates and manatees, right? It's the only facility there that does that. So tell us about the two species of primates in Belize that are globally endangered.
Yeah, we have, as you say, two species. We have the Yucatan black howler monkey, which is one of the loudest mammals on the planet with its vocalizations, and the Central American spider monkey, which is one of the most intelligent non-human primates. So both very, very special in many ways. We've been working with them now since the end of 2010, working in rescue, rehabilitation and release. So yes, they're fascinating species. They're both globally endangered, primarily because of habitat loss throughout their ranges, and secondarily from the illegal wildlife trade, which, as you're probably aware, is quite big and a very big issue throughout Central America. Somewhat less so in Belize than in its neighboring countries. So yeah, both very special species.
So tell us about the rehabilitation process that comes into play with these two primates.
Yeah, it's one that's evolved. We've developed the process quite considerably to achieve the desired results. You know, we're putting a lot of financial, human resources into rehabilitating animals from their intake condition when they're often in very physically and mentally damaged conditions, getting them to the point of being healthy, both physically and mentally, and with the skills for release in the wild. So, you know, investing like that in each individual of these endangered species, we want to be confident that they are doing well. So it's a planned process that is a very structured process that the animals move through rehabilitation to ensure that they have the maximum possible opportunities for successful return to the wild. We do actually have the highest success rate of anywhere in the world with both manatees and the monkeys we work with in terms of post-release survival. So the processes do work, and it's a lot of fun, but it's also hugely time-consuming. Yeah, fascinating process. So with the monkeys, for instance.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so with the monkeys, for instance, we get a number of babies that'll come in from different causes. Some of them will be confiscated or surrendered from the illegal pet trade. Thankfully, in Belize, that's much less of an issue. We have partnered with the Forest Department of the government of Belize, and a big focus of the partnership is to end the illegal pet trade in monkeys. And that's been hugely successful. The pet trade now is reduced by about 95% from where it
Wow.
was when we started back in the end of 2010. I actually can't
Wow.
think of any other tropical countries where a government body has been able to reduce the illegal trade like that
Wow.
so much in the way that the Forest Department has. Um, but we also deal with stranded monkeys that have become stranded because of forest clearance, forest fragmentation, ending up in tiny pockets of trees that can't support them. The monkeys will come in. The first step is to quarantine them, to clear them of whatever sicknesses they have
Mm.
and repair any injuries that they'll have, and then put them through a process where they'll understand that they're actually a monkey. Because if they'd been kept as an illegal pet on a chain in a backyard
Mm.
or in a rabbit hutch in the backyard, away from other monkeys, they're not even aware that they are necessarily monkeys. If they're lucky, they may have been kept as a surrogate human child in a household, but usually they're not. And that's not very lucky either.
Mm.
So the first thing is to give them the confidence to be able to integrate into a group of other young monkeys of
Mm.
comparable age. And that's where we differ from a lot of organizations. We provide a huge amount of social support for these severely traumatized animals to give them the confidence to then start recognizing themselves as monkeys and play with other monkeys rather than being clinging, nervous wrecks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Once they've integrated into a group, they then have to bond as a group that will hopefully stay together through the whole release process. But they've also got to learn the skills for life in the wild.
Mm.
And that can't be done in a closed enclosure. You can put bendy branches and things in a large cage, but it's still very, very different from being out in the forest. So our final stage of rehabilitation are in pre-release enclosures where we have electric fences surrounding 3/4 of an acre of trees,
Mm.
roughly, for each enclosure. And the monkeys will spend 6 to 12 months in those enclosures learning which branches will take their weights, which ones will snap, how to bend a palm leaf over a forest gap to cross a gap in the canopy, and also the spatial awareness of where each of their family members are. Because if you think about it, in a fixed enclosure, they don't have to bother about where the other members are because they can't go anywhere. But once they're
Yeah.
out in the forest canopy, they can spread out and be lost. And if they get separated from each other, then the risks from predation are a lot
Yeah.
higher. So these are critical skills that they really have to learn in rehabilitation. So it's roughly for a baby monkey coming in, a howler monkey coming in, it's about a 3-year process to go through
Wow.
quarantine, through the nursery, through integration into a group, and then in the forest enclosures to learn those skills. So it's a slow
It's
process,
a long
but it does
process.
give
Yeah.
us a 95% post-release survival through the first year once they're released,
Wow.
which is
Wow.
double what most facilities are able to achieve in the region.
Wow.
So it's carefully structured
Yeah.
and it's tailored to the individual. That's another big difference, is that we don't have a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
Since we're working with endangered species, each individual counts from a conservation perspective, obviously from a welfare perspective as well, but from a conservation perspective, each individual is important.
Uh-huh.
So we do tailor the speed of movement through the process to fit the capabilities, the capacities of the individuals.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Besides the primates, Paul, Belize is also home to the is this Antillean manatee.
That's
Tell us
correct.
about this globally endangered species and also about the threats that they face.
Hmm. Fascinating animals. Up in the States, you have the Floridian manatee, which is the other species of the West Indian manatee. So the West Indian manatee as a species has two subspecies. We have here in Belize the Antillean manatee. Belize is actually home to the largest population of Antillean manatees in the world, but it's under significant threat.
Mm-hmm.
Manatees have no natural predators. They're herbivorous animals that feed on seagrass, and nothing preys upon them naturally. But unfortunately, they face very significant threats from speedboats.
Oh.
Their ability to avoid boat collisions is surprisingly limited. They get very confused by the sounds of approaching propellers, and they're
Mm.
not able to determine the exact direction of that. And the result is that very often manatees will be hit by
Mm.
boats. And when we first started, with manatee rehab back in 1999, the bulk of the boat traffic were small local fishing boats, often 25-foot boats with a 40 horsepower engine on them. So relatively small engines, and a large manatee hit by one of those might suffer pretty severe injuries, broken ribs, massive lacerations, collapsed lungs, but they stood a reasonable chance of surviving those injuries. Now, with the changing primarily from tourism, from the cruise ship industry, and the use of larger boats to carry passengers from the cruise ships to the mainland and then on trips up the rivers, the boats are now much bigger, and they'll have 250 horsepower engines on them, often 4 engines of that size on one boat. And frankly, if a manatee or any other animal gets hit by a 250 horsepower engine, it's not going to survive.
Yeah.
So it's a changing world, and we're having to adapt our processes accordingly to deal with that. So we get quite a number of manatee calves over the years that come in that have been orphaned by their mother being killed by a big boat. And the calves, if they're found within a day or two of the mother being accidentally killed by a boat, the calves will still generally be in pretty good condition, and they come in and are quite straightforward for us to care for. Unfortunately, some of them are not found or rescued for a week or more, so they're already severely dehydrated, emaciated, sometimes significantly injured, and they pose a much more significant threat, a much more significant challenge, I should say, for us to actually heal and bring back to good health. And some of those calves can take several weeks for us to be able to stabilize them before they will start moving forward and thriving. But we do have a high success rate. Actually, as with the monkeys, we have the highest success rate of anywhere in the world with manatees. So we have a 100% post-release survival. So every manatee we've released has been fine and thriving right through the monitored period, which in some cases we've been seeing them 13, 14 years after release still doing very well. So it's a process that, again, it's very time consuming. A manatee calf coming in will spend 3.5, 4.5 years here going through a parallel process to the monkeys, including an extended soft release where they're learning those critical life skills before release. But at the end of the day, the reward is seeing some of those animals that have come in almost dead, becoming healthy, and now entering the wild population.
Yeah, not just surviving, but thriving. So
exactly. I mean, one that springs to mind is a male called Lucky. He was rescued by one of the rescue teams in Belize City several years ago. He was actually beached, and he looked like a mummified corpse, the skeleton covered with a dry, cut skin, and basically was 98% dead. And yet he still had a will to live. He was still suckling rehydration fluids in the vehicle, on the rescue vehicle. It took quite a long time for him to heal from the severe damage his body had suffered from the severe malnutrition and dehydration. But he's now a huge male, busy mating other females in the area, and doing what manatees should be doing. So it can be hugely rewarding seeing some of these almost dead animals return to good health and then become thriving and return to the breeding population. So we had one female, Twiggy, who actually was released many years ago. She came back in July and hung around for a while. And 3 weeks later actually had a calf here. And she stayed with the calf for a couple of weeks before leading it off to other seagrass areas. But she evidently felt the desire to come back to where she was brought up to give birth to her first calf. So that was very special as well.
That's special, yeah. I'm sure that was a moment that that's unforgettable.
It is.
Through the years, how many of these endangered species has Wild Tracks helped, protected, cared for? How give us an idea of the impact you guys have had.
Yeah, it's different scales. So with the manatees, it's much smaller numbers than the monkeys. The magnitude of the monkey problems in terms of numbers is far greater, but the population of manatees is smaller, so proportionally it's a bigger issue for the species. We've taken in and rehabilitated and successfully released 16 manatees. We've had a few that have died, inevitably, that were just too sick to save, but 16 have been successfully returned to the wild population. We have a 17th on soft release at the moment, learning those life skills, and we have 2 more calves in rehabilitation at the moment. Those numbers are dwarfed by the monkey numbers. So we've had an intake of 156 monkeys of the 2 species in total. We've released now 99, 100 howler monkeys into 2 protected areas. We have first and second generation wild-born young from those. The populations are growing fast. But it's not just the numbers. We use wildlife rehabilitation as a conservation tool. It's not a standalone activity. As a standalone, its benefits are limited in some ways, but if it can be integrated into national conservation efforts, including protected area management, improving management effectiveness, threat abatement, public awareness, enforcement, then it starts becoming a much more valuable tool. And in fact, from the manatees perspective, although it's been important getting those 16 manatees so far back into the wild population, especially for the females to add to the breeding population, a far bigger impact has been the change in public perception. So, which has been huge. So to demonstrate that, our village, Sartaneja, is the largest fishing community in the country. The fishermen fish the entire coastline, primarily for lobster and conch. 30 years ago, Sartaneja fishermen were assessed as the second biggest threat to coastal life. Because of their unsustainable fishing practices in those days. Anyone my age and older has eaten manatee meat in Belize, certainly in the coastal communities. So the biggest threat was coastal development, destroying habitats and disrupting habitats. The second biggest were the fishermen from our home village here in Sartaneja. But with the outreach activities, from the very first manatee we had, we would bring local school children, all the local school children, in to see a manatee, learn that they are actually mammals, not fish. They eat seagrass, not fish. They're not a threat to their parents' livelihood. That they are sentient animals with a long nurturing period from the mother. That has brought about a huge awareness and a shift in behavior. So the same population of fishermen who 30 years ago were assessed as the second largest threat to manatees are now great custodians of them. So they're the ones advising us of suspicious boat activity at the southern end of the country, Guatemalan illegal fishing, illegal use of nets, or at this end of the country, up on the Mexican end of the country, suspicious boat activity. So if they see a stranded manatee or a manatee in distress, they ring the reports into us, and they'll provide the boat support to help us go and do a rescue, move these animals, which are sometimes big, and bring them in. And that shift from being a big threat to the manatees to now being great custodians across the entire coastline has been a much more important conservation gain for the species than getting a relatively small number of individuals back into the wild. So it's that kind of holistic picture which is the real value. Neither
totally
could really
agree.
happen without, and it's the close encounters that really make a big difference. It's hard for people to become really to buy into something just from text or just from a video. When people actually see these animals close to and learn about them, it does bring a different dimension and a far greater level of participation and understanding.
They feel more invested, more accountable to their own community and environment. I understand, Paul, that volunteers also play a big role in your efforts. Tell us how these volunteers have really, helped your programs.
We frankly couldn't do what we do without the volunteer team. We've worked as volunteers many years ago in different countries, and we rapidly learned how useful the skills you can acquire, the experience you can acquire from that are, but also how much you can contribute to worthy causes. So we have quite a significant number of volunteers. We have a minimum period of the commitment of 1 month because of a volunteerism organization. The people are here to commit and really work with animals in rehabilitation. We have quite a significant number of Belizean local volunteers, which is great, of course, and we have a larger number of international volunteers who come from 62, 63 countries, something like that in total now, so from worldwide. They're very heavily involved in the day-to-day activities of providing the rehabilitative care for the animals. They're given the on-site training that they need and supervised very closely, but they do most of the activities. So some people from US zoos are very surprised that people can come in and within a few days are bottle feeding a manatee or providing surrogacy parenting for an endangered monkey. We found that people with capacities and commitment can really be entrusted quite fast. And obviously that's assessed during our orientation. And we found that people don't have to come from a biology background. So we've had great volunteers who've been in careers in bartending or waitressing or whatever, mechanics, accounting. The skills we're looking for are commitment, interest, reliability, responsibility, and you don't have to be a biologist to have those characteristics. So we've had a lot of volunteers from a broad range of backgrounds. Inevitably, a lot decide, gosh, this is really something very special, and then decide, okay, they're going to go on and do a degree in biology or zoology or something, and then try and reroute their career in that direction, because it's a very moving experience for a lot of people to.
Or they return, right? They return
difference.
every year, no, Paul?
Yeah, we have a very high rate of returnees, which is great. And our volunteers actually come mostly by word of mouth. We don't actually advertise at all. So it's mostly people hearing about us from other volunteers or our conservation partners. And yeah, we have volunteers who've been 6, 7, 8 times and still returning, which for us is great because it means we have people we know. They're up to speed almost straight away on arrival, and it works very well. And they can help support the new first-time volunteers as well, of course.
And then, of course, the animals are familiar with them as well, right?
Yes, although there's no guarantee that they'll be working with the same animals. Sometimes people will, but sometimes they won't. It depends where we need to apply those skills. So yes, some people will have a particular flair for working with the newest babies. Some actually do better with the older animals in the pre-release enclosure. We even involve some of them in the post-release tracking, because we put a lot of focus on the release phase and tracking animals after release to ensure that they are doing well and to be positioned to make an intervention if not. And we do have some volunteers that we involve in that process as well. So we really look at where we most need, where we can apply people's skills. People differ. So some people are well suited to working with babies, others much better suited to working with big hefty animals just before release.
With community partners and support, from your volunteers, how do you plan to expand or move forward with the programs of Wild Tracks?
We're actually in the early stages of a significant expansion of particularly the facilities at the moment. We started off, we're still a very small organization. We work on a very small, tight budget. We offer very high level of cost effectiveness for what we do, largely because we work as a volunteer organization, largely as a volunteer. We do have some paid staff, but we're relying heavily on the volunteers. But we are, as our footprint increases, because we do deal with other species, so pretty much any terrestrial mammal that we're asked to wildlife we will take, that we're asked to rehabilitate. So we've just in the process of replacing our primary animal kitchen. We had one animal kitchen that's now being replaced by a whole facility which has 2 animal kitchens, storerooms for feeds, fruit room for the fresh fruit, a clinic which is going to really help a lot, and a medication store. And that's phase 1. Phase 2 will actually be training, because my wife does a lot of training, capacity building in conservation planning, management planning, biodiversity assessment, which is one of the gaps nationally. The third phase is actually a renewed interpretive center, because we've had a lot of school groups, huge number of school groups over the years, but our facilities are very, very limited in that regard. So we're going to be putting in a substantial interpretive center, bathroom facilities that go with it, to deal with these large numbers of school groups, local school groups who come through. So that's one side. Another is that we're actually upgrading a lot of the enclosures still further. We have good facilities, but some of those facilities are very old. So the main spider monkey enclosure, we have to remove the entire roof of that and replace it, which in itself is a huge logistical task. If you're working 40 feet up and you're moving these huge beams of wood and replacing a large expanse of wire mesh, some of these things are significant tasks without cranes and so forth as well, of course. So we're looking at continuing the upgrades so that we can cope with the increasing demands that we are seeing. We've diversified, so we take in pretty much any species of mammal, they're saying, so we had to put in additional enclosures to cope with the different species. So 2 days ago, for instance, we had a young margay kitten brought in that had been rescued by someone who was being kept illegally, so that was surrendered. And a little margay cat, it's the smallest spotted cat from the region. We've had a few of those over the years, and been returned to the wild successfully. But it just, another intake kind of reminds us, okay, well, the problem's not done. We're going to continue having some of these animals coming in, and that we need to be ready and have the enclosures for them.
Yeah, there will always be an animal that would probably need saving. And I'm just so happy that you guys are there and are able to accommodate. And like you said, there's the expansion, because the demand is getting higher, and with community support, hopefully more and more people will hear about you guys and the wonderful work that you guys do, and jump on board and support you guys. And we at Just Wish Foundation, we want to do our part, because we certainly see the importance of what you guys do in Belize. And it's not just about saving these animals, but it's, like you said, it's the systemic change, it's the change in behavior, and it's really holding people accountable to care for their environment and for these animals. So we applaud you guys. We applaud you, Paul.
Thank you.
And your wife, Zoe, and what you guys do in Belize, and the volunteers at Wild Tracks. And like I said, we want to do our part and support you guys. And we just wish you guys well. And we hope we can visit you guys someday and see the facility and see the animals and see the wonderful work that you guys do. So more power to you, Paul. And thank you so much for sharing with us your story.
Well, thank you too. We are very grateful for having a great team, both of volunteers and supporters. It's a team effort to make this work and accomplish what we do. We are very fortunate to work with a suite of very, very special animals, and to be able to give them a second chance to return to life in the wild. It's a very special lifestyle that we are very grateful for, and for the support that we do receive towards accomplishing all that. So thank you.
Thank you so much.